Unit 6. Absolutism versus Constitutionalism. The Puritan Revolution. Part 1. During the first half of the 17th century, while in France the Bourbons were consolidating power, in England the Stuart kings James I and Charles I lost control of the government, and England plunged into civil war. How they got there is another story. The English monarchy was immensely popular when the last Tudor sovereign, Elizabeth I, died in 1603. Elizabeth left no direct heirs, and the throne passed to James Stuart, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and the King of Scotland. When James arrived on the throne, the English crown was handicapped by inadequate revenues, an ineffective bureaucracy, and the absence of a regular army. Also, England was one of the few European states where religious tensions were rising rather than declining during the 17th century. The Puritans formed a dissident Calvinist movement within the state church, agitating strenuously against the Catholic ceremonial and institutional elements in the Anglican Church. Puritans could be found practically anywhere in England, especially in the intellectual circles and fast growing in the younger landed gentry. James I was a failure, despite good intentions and real abilities. He had inherited very little of his mother's rashness or her good looks, for that matter. However, he was a well-educated scholar and proud of it. In 1598, he wrote The True Law of Free Monarchies, in which he insisted his Scottish subjects obey their king, who was accountable to God alone. Elizabeth had avoided the issue of divine right of kings. James, on the other hand, was not only wrote a book on it, but also frequently lectured the English Parliament on the subject. James did not look like God's lieutenant. His tongue was too big for his mouth, and his rolling eyes gave him constant nervous expressions. He wore clothes heavily padded against the idea of would-be assassins, and while hunting he had to be tied to his horse so that he would not fall off. Almost instantly, James was unpopular with most of England. In 1605, after James failed to grant Catholics toleration as suspected, the famous Gunpowder Plot of 1605 took place. The plot intended to kill the king, his family, and most of the Protestant aristocracy in a single attack by blowing up the Houses of Parliament during the state opening on the 5th of November 1605. The conspirators had planned to abduct the royal children, not present in Parliament, and incite a popular revolt in the Midlands. The plot was found out and the conspirators were executed, most famously Guy Fawkes. The crisis began to take its clear shape in his quarrels with Parliament itself. James was a fiscal nightmare for Parliament. His personal expenditures were double that of Elizabeth, and constantly asked for more. Plus, his public quarrels with the Puritans grew more and more nasty. For these reasons, his relations with Parliament deteriorated quickly. Everything went wrong for James I during the closing years of his reign. As he grew older and slacker, his previously suppressed homosexuality asserted itself, and he handed over the direction of affairs to his favorites, young men whose only qualifications was their physical beauty. The last and most controlling of these was the man named George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, who had total control over the king from 1619 until his death. Parliament also denounced James' foreign policy, which was pro-Spanish, because the king hoped to arrange a marriage between a Spanish Habsburg and his son Charles. In 1623, Charles and Buckingham left for Madrid in an effort to try and woo the Spanish. Throughout the trip, which cost Parliament a fortune, James wrote anxious letters to his sweet boys, and he called them Baby Charles and Steenie, after the angelic face of St. Stephen, and closed his letters, Your dear old dad and husband James. But Charles came home from Madrid brutally rebuffed by the Spanish, causing James, under Buckingham's directions, to go to war with Spain. James died shortly after with a massive opposition to the Stuart dynasty. Although James' historian opponents destroy his later reign, James has the legacy in establishing the first successful English colonies in North America and the King James Version of the Bible.